Okay, welcome back, internets. Today we're going to look at personality, and it is a complex topic because with personality, you think you know someone's personality, but can it change? You know, you probably know somebody who's pretty moody. They'll go through periods of being sad or happy or a little bit of both, up and down, left and right. Their personality might be changing, but personality itself, what makes it personality, is more of a durable or lasting situation. So for some people, especially younger people, they may not have developed their true full personality just yet until they've matured. So what is personality? It's complicated, it's complex, and it is a hypothetical construct, which means it's something that we think about, but it's really hard to pin down. And that means it's also very difficult to test for and be certain that you completely 100% know someone's personality is this type or that type or whatever. We'll look at some ways we can test for it, but I don't think there's a truly 100% positive test for what is your personality. So what is it? It's an individual's unique set of consistent behavioral traits. And a personality trait is durable, and it's a durable disposition to behave in a particular way in all kinds of different various situations. So are you honest, dependable, moody, impulsive, suspicious, anxious, excitable, domineering, or maybe just flat out friendly? You have friends and people that you know at school, maybe even some teachers who you could classify as having a certain type of personality. This is in some ways common sense, excuse me, and in other ways hard to categorize exactly. Because you may think someone is a certain way at school. I've had students who are very, very quiet, but their friends will tell me, oh, you should see them when they leave school. They'll never shut up. They talk like crazy. So I guess their true personality probably wouldn't be the way they were with me and how they behaved in the classroom, but how they were, the majority of the time. We'll look at factor analysis, not only in this chapter, but other chapters, where we'll analyze and we'll look at the correlations among various different variables that are analyzed to identify closely related clusters of variables. This gives us a better idea or educated guess as to what someone's personality would be. So in your notes, we're going to do a little personality test here. I'd like you just to write down or, put in your mind's imagination here. What do you see in this image? So pause it, look at the image for a few minutes or seconds, and try to determine exactly what you see. Then unpause it in a second here, and we'll talk about it. What do you see? Well, I don't know what I see. I guess I could say that I think what I see here is an insect that is potentially a blood-sucking insect who has just got done doing his blood sucking. I mean, maybe this is blood here, and these are his pinchers, and this is his, the back or exoskeleton of him. And maybe he's got some legs here that are just covered in red. I don't know. I mean, this isn't anything. It's just an ink blot. And basically they take a piece of paper and they fold it in half after they've put some ink on one side, and it mirrors the other side or comes close to it. This is called a projective test. The Rorschach ink blot test is the most widely used of the projective tests. It's usually a set of 10 ink blocks that were designed by Herman Rorschach. He is the guy in the middle there that you see with the little tie on, not the guy on the right who is from the comic and movie The Watchmen, but that Watchmen character is based off of him. They seek to identify people's innermost feelings by analyzing their interpretations of the plots. So again, looking at personality, can you be 100% certain what someone's personality is by what they're going to tell you about an ink blot that doesn't really have any meaning in any way? No. However, and Rorschach was a Freudian and practiced some Freudian type of perspectives, and his approach was Freudian. And what approach is that? Psychodynamic or psychoanalytic? And what are they trying to get to? Where are they trying to make their discovery about what makes a person tick? And you got to think back about the iceberg, and that 70% of the iceberg that's under the water, it represents the unconscious. The preconscious is there, that might be floating just above the water sometimes. It's sometimes apparent to us and sometimes it isn't. And the conscious mind is what we are more aware of, and it's the tip of the iceberg that's outside of the water. So what are psychoanalytic folks trying to get to? The things that you don't even know are shaping your behavior and your personality. So they're going to give you something with no meaning and ask you to ascribe a meaning to it, and that's maybe the most unscientific thing ever, but you are trying to get into kind of a talk therapy situation where the patient or the person who's being psychoanalyzed is just going to freely talk. Now, the other way to doing that is free association, but this is another method that would bring up free association. So let's look at some other ways to do projective tests and some of the criticisms with it. The projective tests are the ones at the bottom there. The woman staring off in the distance. You could say to the patient or the client, what do you think is happening here? And it's going to be a situation where when you give these projective tests, you give no information. You just show the picture and say, what is your interpretation? You don't say something like, well, what is the woman looking off into the distance thinking about? I mean, I guess you could, but you want to leave it as open-ended as possible. The image in the middle there of the woman crying, and she has her hand on the door handle, it looks like, and the man is there lying across the bed. Is he dead? Is he asleep? Is there somebody asleep next to him and she's uncovered something? Is he did she kill him? I mean, these are things that would be completely open to interpretation, like the ink blot there to the right, which to me looks like a ship on Battlestar Galactica, but that's just me. Critics argue that projective tests lack both reliability and validity, and that's probably not a good thing. So you're not going to get consistent results, and it's not going to predict what it is supposed to. So that's not good, is it? Even trained raters would evaluate the same patient and come up with a different interpretation, so that's the reliability part. Projective tests may misdiagnose a normal person as having a disorder when they don't. I think it's a piece of information. Maybe it's a conversation starter for a person who today, not a Freudian exactly, because I don't think there's any true 100% Freudian analysts. Maybe there are, but there are not many of them. And what you would do with this, if you were a counselor or somebody who was a therapist working with someone, is to give them an opportunity to try to get them talking, but not lead them in any way, just to see what might come out and to see what they may want to talk about. We did the Oreo cookie test in class, and this is a good one. If you're absent, you can take this if you'd like to. But how do you eat your Oreo cookie? Is that a valid way of looking at your personality, and could you measure it? I think a lot of you would say no, because maybe you twisted it apart, but then the Oreo cookie test said that you were something very different than the personality that you know of. So anyway, there's the toothpaste test and the toilet paper test. What I'll tell you is that really there are more reliable and more valid ways of measuring personality, but it is a bit subjective, and it's going to maybe change or be interpreted different by different people. So what are some ways that you can assess personality? And remember, you want to do life outcomes, situational test, an observer rating, or self-reporting. This gets back to like introspection that we talked about in the first chapter. In a lot of ways, a personality test, like a projective test, is indeed introspection. They're looking into themselves or thinking about what they've experienced and then just trying to tell you what that is. There are some objective personality tests, and objective means that they're not going to be subjective to interpretation. These are multiple choice, like locus of control. That's a set of tests. And then the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. That's not typically on the AP test often, but it can be mentioned sometimes, and maybe parts of it would be mentioned. Typically they're not going for like a breakdown of the MMPI, but they're working that into a scenario or situation. But sometimes students see MMPI and then they're like freaked out, like, what in the world is that? We didn't talk about that. Just remember that you don't have to know everything to use something and to get something out of it. So hang in there when you may come across something like that. Projective personality tests are the Rorschach, which we mentioned, and then the TAT, the TAT, Thematic Apperception Test. And this is a projective psychoanalytic test that we just talked about, the pictures of the woman. This picture at the bottom is of a person leaning against the door, and it looks like they're crying. Maybe a person would look at it and have a story to say that, hey, they're not crying, they're laughing. They're laughing hysterically. I mean, they're having such a good time. But historically, it's been among the most widely researched, taught, and used of such tests. Proponents of the technique assert that it's a person's responses that will reveal their underlying motives, concerns, and the way they see the social world through their stories and what they make up about these ambiguous people and situations. But as we've mentioned, they're not always perfect. Personality tests and employee selection. If you are trying to apply for a job, especially one that's going to be a salaried employee, maybe you're a college graduate down the road, and you're going to have a job, your first job, you may come across a personality test as part of the interview process. Is that legal to do that? Well, if you want a job, it probably is. I think they shouldn't be able to use your gender or your race against hiring you. I think you could have a case for that. But I'm not sure you could say that you've had personality discrimination. But that's interesting. I've never really considered it much before. But one way that they definitely use this is with NFL players, and especially NFL quarterbacks who are the leaders of teams. And these NFL teams are going to invest millions, and sometimes over the course of a career, many multi-millions of dollars into a player. And are you going to pay somebody that much money when maybe they're not a born leader? And you're going to give a quarterback that kind of money when they're not maybe the leader that they showed in college, and maybe you couldn't tell that they had good leadership potential. So they give them tests, and the new one that they've been taking here in the last year is called the Player Assessment Tool. So it's one the NFL has kind of come up with, but in the past they had a test called the Wonderlic. And other professions use this as well. It's a bunch of questions that, and it's timed, and you have to, the score is like usually, I don't know, anywhere from, it says, 0 to 50 there. Most people, a good score, and that score there says 33, is in the top 96 percentile. So you get an idea of what that's like as you're looking at that score. Strong fit, moderate fit, weak fit. And, it depends on the test and how you're looking at it. But how well do these tests predict behavior? Well, they have leaked some of the scores of these old Wonderlic tests, and they don't really correspond well to someone's career, and they're not a good judge of like how well they're going to be as far as an overall player for many years. But typically, they're a pretty good predictor. There's a strong correlation, as it says on the right side in the yellow box. A strong correlation between Wonderlic scores and the higher Wonderlic scores actually led to slightly worse quarterback performance, at least during the rookie year. So that's really interesting. Maybe a higher score would mean that these young players were maybe overthinking it, and someone without a higher score might just go out there and just play and not think too much. But over the course of a career, they may have to be doing some more thinking. But how will tests be used in the future like this? Do you think that it's going to be even something that they would do in schools? Have you taken a personality test in one of your classes? We're going to try and do one at some point during the semester. If I can get a hold of a decent one that I think would actually work, other than the Oreo cookie one. But personality theories to focus on. There's 4 main theories, and in your book there's all these. But another way of thinking about the theories and ways of looking at personality is if there's an approach in psychology, and we looked at all the approaches in the first chapter, then that's probably going to have like sort of an idea or a focus on that approach, whether it's humanism or a biological or cognitive or behaviorist, psychodynamic. These different approaches, they each have maybe a slant on what personality would be, just like they might with intelligence or development, those different areas. The paradox is that personality tests have a number of shortcomings and weaknesses, but they remain invaluable measurements for both research and clinical work. So although we know they're not perfect, we still rely on them an awful lot. And I think that they're just a piece of information. Sometimes that piece of information would lead to just helping you understand someone better, or maybe a bit of help pair them with others in the workplace that would be similar to them or would work well with them. Maybe you don't want all these people that you've hired to be go-getter leaders, because you can't have too many leaders. Some people have to follow, and you'll have leaders going in all different directions, leading themselves because no one will be following them. So there are different ways to look at this. We'll look at a bunch of different ways of looking at personality. In the 5-factor model is 1, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Those are the 5 different factors, and they can measure these to see where you fall on this. It's kind of a scale. But personality tests or inventories, like the MMI, and there's a second version of it called the MMPI-2, Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. So developed in the 30s, and they've revitalized it over time. But it is another personality inventory that assesses traits. There are questionnaires in which people respond to a wide variety of items. They're going to look all across the spectrum, maybe bring up different situations to try to uncover how somebody will think in a certain situation. I've taken some of these types of tests before, and I find that if you're in a certain frame of mind, you may answer differently than maybe you would if you were in maybe your normal state or a calmer state. So that's interesting. Like, the environment could definitely change you. If you're doing this for a job interview and you're doing a personality test, how many people are just answering not based upon what they truly believe in and feel in, but based upon what they think might get them the job? So these are all a little bit subjective, even the multiple choice ones. So what they wanted to do with the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory is to look for abnormal personality tendencies. Now, in this chapter, although it is personality, we're not going to look at the abnormal side of personality very much. And so we'll save that for kind of the end of the semester, although we'll be mixing some of it in there as we go, for the abnormal psychology, cognitive or psychological disorder unit, which will be right at the end of the semester. So everything's kind of building up towards that, and this piece here helps us to understand that when we get there. It says stable or change there in green. So is our personality consistent, or does it depend or change upon the situation? Traits remain constant over time and across situations. So if you are a shy person, you're going to be a shy person in just about every situation, or most situations. However, behaviors can change and do. People do different things in unpredictable ways, and you can never be quite sure how someone's going to react to certain things, even if they have a very solid and steady type of personality. One's average personality as a whole is pretty predictable, though. And I'd kind of challenge you to try this at home and maybe try to categorize family members according to, the first slide we had here. Is your mom or dad, how do you think of them? Honest, dependable, moody, impulsive, suspicious. I'd be curious what they think of you too. You might want to ask them. But I wonder if you gave them one of these tests, if it would match what your common sense told you about them. And my thought here on this would be that you are probably not around that person 100% of the time. So you're not sure exactly what their personality may be. Like Mr. Duez in class is pretty upbeat and positive, but I'm not always upbeat and positive. Sometimes I'm pretty grouchy, as I say with a smile. And that's just at home, and that's the way your personality can be different in some different places. But the traits, as it said on this slide, the traits appear to remain pretty constant across situations. Personality trait perspective. So we're going to look at the trait perspective first. This is Gordon Allport. He identified thousands of personality traits and grouped them into 3 different areas: the cardinal traits, the central traits, and the secondary traits. So he's trying to categorize this and make some sense of it. A tendency to respond in a certain way to many different situations. Trait theorists believed that every trait applies to all people. All traits can be measured. Trait theorists also look for connections between an individual's behavior patterns. So they're asking questions like this: what behaviors go together, which are similar, and which or what do the behavior and traits mean? So Gordon Allport described personality in terms of the fundamental traits or characteristic patterns of behavior and dispositions. He's got the 3 main traits there, and I kind of did them in Stanford Cardinal red, the central trait there in blue, and the secondary trait in green. So a cardinal trait is a characteristic or feature so important that a person is identified by it. It's like they're north, south, east, or west. It's consistent. You know where that is on this person. Scrooge in A Christmas Carol was a Scrooge, and he had that same personality. And it was a cardinal trait. He was pretty consistent. Central trait is a trait that makes us predictable in most situations, like a person who's shy or a flirt, but they wouldn't always potentially be that way, but they tend to be. Secondary trait, least important of the 3, but conveys our preferences to items like Chinese food, rap music, whatever your whichever way you'd lean, and that might tell you more about someone's personality. Then we have the personality trait perspective. This is 16 personality factors, the 16 PF by Raymond Cattell. Using statistics or factor analysis identifies these 16 factors, and you can see them up there at the top of the page. So there are things like on the top right corner: warmth, dominance, social blindness, vigilance. There's some different traits there. Isync and Isync, they were married, and there they are at the bottom of the page there, came up with this 2 basic dimensions of personality rated on a continuum. And so you can see that down there at the bottom. You've got extroversion versus introversion. So the extroversion is the blue area here. Extroversion and introversion. Introversion is the green area there. So they kind of play off of each other. And I probably should have made the colors a little bit more matching the chart there, but you get the idea. Extroversion, introversion. Extroversion neurotic, and on the other side, of course, at the bottom, extroversion stable. So there you go. And then here it is: emotionally stable versus instability. So here's extroversion neurotic and extroversion stable. Introversion neurotic, introversion stable. So there's sort of a continuum here that goes together. What is extroversion? You're outgoing. If it's introversion, you're reserved. Stability, easygoing, relaxed, well-tempered. I'm sure we know a lot of people like that. Instability, maybe that's me, moody, anxious, restless, on the move, constantly having something that they're complaining about. That's probably me. And so you see how their scores might be looked at in terms of factors, and the factors at the top here, and this is just one way you could kind of measure those things. Costa and McRae had the Big 5 test. So you could go out here and open this link. I'll open the link in a new window, and let's see if it's opened here. Let's try it again here. It didn't open. That's okay. Let's do this. Copy link address and come out here and see if we can open. Oh, there it is. Oh, I know. It's the it's on top. So here it is. Personality test, the Big 5. You can go down through here and try to take it. I see myself as someone who is talkative. Strongly agree, strongly disagree. I see myself who tends to find fault with others. Strongly agree. Maybe you're in the middle. It's not one or the other. So you go through and you take all these things into account. You answer all the questions. Are you female? Are you male? How old are you? If you choose to rate another person, how old are they? And you can enter in their information. So this is interesting. This is another way to look at someone's personality. And to me, that's the way I've done most of these in the past. Is we've done like some kind of a test on a computer when you've gone through, or you've marked a sheet of paper with this, and then people have collected it and compiled the information together. The 5 things that they look for on here are openness, conscientious, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And one good way to remember this for an AP test or for a test is the acronym there, OCEAN. O-C-E-A-N. So openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Let's look at traits versus types. So traits are quantitative differences among people. How much does each trait does a person have? How much do they have? How much is unique combination of those traits that make up personality? Types are qualitative differences between people. More like putting people into categories. I know their type. So this is trait theory versus type theory. Evaluation of trait theory. This is in the box. It says it's better at describing than understanding. So do you understand how that would be? If you're looking at quantitative differences, it would be describing rather than understanding them. How are traits related to the thoughts and feelings that precede, accompany, or follow behavior? Fails to capture how traits combine to form complex dynamic individuals. So traits can sometimes be a little bit limited, but here is the type preferences here at the bottom. You've got ESTJ, so extroversion, sensing, thinking, and judging. And you're looking at where you focus your attention, the way you take in information, right here for S, the way you make decisions, how you deal with others. This is very much something that I've seen before. And then you have a type person. It says here teacher is ENFG. So E would be extroversion. Where do you focus your attention? You focus your attention on the outer world of people and things, because trying to help people learn. Where's the N going to fall into place here? Intuition. It's the way you take in information. The F would be feeling. And the J would be judging. And when you manifesting or have universal values and you value people, I think that would probably be a good idea to be a teacher. If you don't do those things, that might not be a good idea. But you see some of the ideas here of, like, if you have a mix of these different types, that it could kind of compartmentalize you in a way where you'd understand your role and maybe what you should be doing for a company or doing for an organization, or where you could be best utilized. Like, if you're the promoter, ESTP, maybe you would be in a spot where you should be in marketing, or someone who could get out there and tell the world about the product that your company sells. If you are a provider, Maybe that's a little bit different, or protector or inspector. If you're an inspector, maybe you should be somebody that's looking at quality control in your company. But if your quality control person is so concerned about valuing others so much that they might look past discrepancies or problems that people have with the controls that you would want to put on, like, say, a manufacturing plant, that's not going to quite work. So hopefully you understand that a little bit. It's more complicated than this, obviously, so I'm not going to get into all of it, but you may come across Myers-Briggs is one of the ones I've taken before. You may come across these kinds of tests, and then just knowing about it a little bit better might help. And the bottom right hand corner is your different, like, numbers that correspond to E, I, SN, TF, JPs. And then there's the extroversion, openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism. It's a correlation. The closer to 1, the closer the number is to 1 or -1, the higher the degree of correlation. So they're looking at the scores there at the bottom right of someone's test and how that would work out. So personality trait perspective, and we're looking at the traits, the big 5 traits. This is, of course, that ocean, OCEAN, and I think they have it a little bit different here on the screen. So you've got emotional stability. The opposite of emotional stability is neuroticism, someone who's constantly angry or worried. You've got extroversion and introversion, agreeableness and antagonism, openness to experience and resistance. This kind of makes sense. Conscientiousness, someone who's going to put some thought into things and complete their task, and someone who's impulsive, who's going to do whatever they want to do when they want to do it. Looking at the big 5 here, this set of slightly expanded factors, and currently is the best approximation of best or basic trait dimensions. So not the work of just one theorist, but a compilation of many theories and the work of many people. And it's the most accepted trait theory in psychology today. The traits are rated on a continuum scale like I-sync and I-sync. Now remember, this is a continuum, not usually seeing extremes. They fall on a scale. So the big 5, how do they use this in the real world? The business world is going to use it to provide a reliable standard vocabulary with which to discuss the different personalities and people that they have to manage within their company. And this is interesting because they call it canoe here. So if you see it on the right side, you've got the canoe and CANOE. So there's your C, A. The N is need for stability, so that would be the number 1. The O is openness, and of course the E then is extroversion. So it's a different way of looking at it. Let's switch gears here and talk about the different approaches to psychological personality. Behavior theory. There's some key things to know. What is the behavioral view of personality structure? How does Skinner's operant conditioning fall into this? You should discuss Bandura's social learning. So let's look some more into this. And before we move along too far here, I just want you to pause the video. In your notes, write down, what is the behavioral theory? How does that work? What does it entail? You've got a picture there of Skinner at the top and Watson at the bottom. What do they believe? How do those approaches that we learned in the first chapter with the evolution of psychology, how would they play out in the personality chapter? So take a second here to write that down or think about it deeply, and then we'll discuss it. Okay, so if you said that behavioral and behaviorism is going to look at the observable behavior and what are they not going to worry about? What are people thinking about? Can you measure consciousness? Not according to Watson and Skinner. And Watson kind of really pushes it to the beginning, extends the work of Ivan Pavlov, and then Skinner takes it to a whole nother level. In 1913, Watson begins this campaign for the behavioral view. He argues that there's no way to measure consciousness or what people are thinking, so why are we trying to do things like introspection? But most prominent proponent of behaviorism becomes Skinner. He says you cannot observe what goes on inside people's minds, so why are we even trying? Instead, measure their behaviors by tweaking and changing their environment. And if you do that, you can also mold and shape someone's learning, which we'll learn about that and talk about that in the learning chapter when we get there down the road. You know how this works in a general way, but if you tell a joke to your friends and your friends laugh at that joke, you have a tendency to want to tell that joke again, right? This is reinforcement. What if your friends didn't laugh and they looked at you like, that was not only not funny, that was offensive, and you offended me by that joke and you shouldn't have said it? Are you going to repeat it again? Probably not, because you've paid a price with your friends for doing so, and you're not going to want to continue to do that. Do you trust others and then the actions backfire? So you give somebody some money, you loan them some money, and then they say, oh, I'm going to pay you back on Friday. They don't pay you back on Friday, and now you're short the money that you need. Are you going to loan them money again, or loan anyone money again in the foreseeable future? Probably not. So you avoid other people, and your anxiety is reduced, and then what happens? You have a tendency to keep avoiding others, and that just increases. So some of these things can really perpetuate positive and negative things, and that's where learning happens. You learn what you should do and shouldn't do in the world, and this is behaviorism. Your behavior is shaped and molded by your environment. The socio-cognitive or social cognitive approach is more of a cognitive approach, where you're looking at the world as through the kind of the mindset of that the brain is this computer, and it functions and it works, and you need to analyze the way that the cognition happens. Bandura had an approach that said the importance of conscious thoughts and emotions towards personality. And he said the approach derived from the principles of animal and human learning, or behaviorism. So that's why this is kind of tied into the behaviorist part. The social cognitive perspective of personality emphasizes the importance of observational learning. That's one. And observational learning is you're watching something happen, and then you learn that that's the right way to do it, and then you do it yourself. So self-efficacy, the learned expectation of success. If we think we will succeed, we have a better chance of succeeding. This is the little engine that could. I think I can, I think I can. If we think we can, we can. This is a self-efficacy thing. So it's almost like this self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe in yourself, you have a better chance of succeeding. Then there's reciprocal determinism. This is the behavior, the external environment, and personality factors interact to create our personality and define how we interact with the world. So that's another way of looking at his social modeling theory. So converting observation into cognition and a cognitive rule, you've got attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. The reproduction means you're going to redo what you have seen and paid attention to and retained. And then you'll have motivation. And what's the motivation to reproduce it? So the most difficult of these four to do and to get people to accomplish is the reproductive part. But yet in the Bobo dog experiment, they reproduce the same behaviors pretty easily. So real interesting. And there's a video clip there at the bottom if you want to learn more about Bandura, and we'll see more of him down the road. Rotter's expectancy theory is learning creates expectancies that guide behavior. This is Julian Rotter in 1982. This is kind of the master of puppets situation here. And the locus of control. Who has control? Decision to engage in behavior is determined by what the person expects to happen following the behavior, the value the person places on the outcome, and why buy an expensive suit for a job interview if you don't think you're going to get the job. I guess that's one of those behavioral things. If you think you're going to get the job and you expect that that's going to happen, your behavior is going to change. Maybe you would buy it then. The internals and externals of locus of control. Do we see ourselves as controlling the outcome of events, or is it factors outside of us, like somebody else is controlling you? These are important to determine personality, according to Julian Rotter, who's at the bottom there in the picture. The internal of I control the consequences of my behavior. If you believe that you are in control of your behavior, typically what he has found is you're going to have better academic achievement, better interpersonal relations, better efforts to learn, positive attitudes towards exercise. You have less of a chance of smoking and hypertension and heart attacks. External locus of control, where you feel like people are controlling you. The consequences of your behavior are outside your control. You're going to have a more resigned state of mind that, your conditions are what they are, and there's nothing that you can do about them. And that's a pretty helpless standpoint. You're going to have lower efforts to deal with your health, because why should you? There's nothing you can do to help it. You have lower levels of psychological development and adjustment, but in non-responsive environments, the greater sense of satisfaction. So that's an interesting one there. But this is, you don't have to know a terrible bit about locus of control, but this is the kind of thing for an AP test that if you're familiar with Rotter and locus of control, it'll just help in case there's a question that pops up about it. Let's look at the relationship between personal and situational variables. Personal dispositions are a person's inherent qualities of mind and character. So the influence of behavior only in relevant situations. It can lead to behaviors that alter situations which promote other behaviors, and people choose to be in situations that they are in accord with, and they are more important in some situations than in others. So we're talking personal dispositions here. My son has a disposition that's a pretty good one at school. I mean, he has had nothing but positive things said about him by his teachers so far in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. His behavior and the influence of behavior in those situations that are very important, it seems like he's behaving pretty well according to his teachers. Does that mean he's always behaving in other situations? Most of the time he does, but it wouldn't mean that he would. But his personal disposition is one that's pretty suitable for school, and he enjoys school, and he's had success so far. Other students may have a personal disposition that's in opposition to the very controlling environment of a classroom. And so your personal disposition may be to question authority, or be to fight back against the authority figure in the classroom or a principal, and that can lead to a clash there between the situation and what it's calling for and the way their personal disposition corresponds to that. So people choose to be in situations that are in accord with their personal disposition. This means that, if you're someone who enjoys football and you find yourself wanting to be, maybe go to a sports bar and watch a bunch of games at once with a bunch of friends, and you're going to root for your favorite team and you're going to have a good time, that's your personal disposition. You would enjoy doing that kind of thing, and you're going to put yourself in those situations. If you're someone who would rather spend a Sunday at the library, finding a new book that would interest you much, much more in a quiet situation, and that's your personal disposition, you're going to seek out those kinds of opportunities. And obviously, there are going to be situations where those are mismatched, and how you determine what you should do in those situations would lead to some different personality situations. But let's look at a different approach here. This is the humanistic perspective, and the flower power, the 60s child, the peace, love kind of situation, where people are maybe thinking maybe a little bit more positively about the human experience. So in the 1960s, psychologists had become kind of discontented with Freud's negativity and his mechanistic psychology of behaviorists. So okay, Freud, a little freaky and negative, and we've talked about Freud, and the behaviorists like Skinner and Watson, who believe in, like, let's put the rat in this box and we can control their behavior and all that sort of thing. The humanists were like, I don't think either perspective really speaks to me. And two of the most famous are Maslow and Carl Rogers. And they talk about this theory as being this emphasis that individuals control their own behaviors. So we talk about locus of control. They would probably be more focused on that internal control. They believe that people need to feel comfortable with that, and that they do control their world. And they view human nature more in a very much more of a positive light. All humans are born being good people. They're good people, and but their environment may change or whatever, or they may not reach their level of achievement that they want, but that's based upon things not being in place to get them there. But everyone can get there and would get there and achieve and be successful if certain conditions were met. So this is very popular in the 1960s and into the 70s. So the humanistic approach is what I think of as the SpongeBob model. So I'll do this in class, SpongeBob, and for imagination, because SpongeBob is a person or a character, not a real person, but a character that seems to epitomize the humanistic approach. They believe in this personal growth and free will and personal awareness and a very positive outlook. They focus on your unique mental capabilities, your innate drive towards growth. How a person views the world is real important in this perspective. It has roots in existential psychology and Gestalt. Rogers' self-theory discussed things like the importance of free will and psychological growth, and he suggested actualizing tendency is the driving force behind human behavior. You want to improve yourself, or you want to reach a state of self-actualization where you are perfecting yourself and improving yourself. It's all about the self-concept and how we think of ourselves, and they believe that has a very positive, that role has a positive regard. They discuss quite a lot conditions of worth, like evaluating yourself as a person, rather than the actions that you take, or the behaviorist model, or observing their actions. Actualizing tendency and evaluation made by others of that actualization tendency. So let's look at Maslow's growth theory and his hierarchy of needs. The really important thing to understand here is that we move up from the bottom to the top. Don't be thinking that this is like a top-down model or pyramid. This is the physiological needs need to be met first: breathing, food, water, sex, sleep, homeostasis. And then you move up through here through security of your body, of employment, resources, friendship, family, intimacy. Then there's self-esteem, confidence, achievement, respect for others. That's that esteem level. And then the self-actualization at the top is where you're creative and spontaneous and a problem solver, and you accept the world around you, but yet aren't prejudiced towards others, and you have a more positive self-view. His hierarchy of needs is something that pretty much every teacher knows pretty well, because what we're taught is if a student comes to us to school without having having any breakfast to eat, he maybe hasn't had a shower or clean clothes, or not having very much interaction with a loving parent at home, how are they going to then be able to kind of switch gears and suddenly start to work and learn at a high level? Their basic minimum needs are not being met. And so, I think that makes a lot of sense in many ways. So deficiency orientation. Most people are preoccupied with their perceived needs for things that they do not have. The growth orientation, something they discuss quite a lot in this approach, that you draw satisfaction from what is available in life rather than from achieving what is missing. That's that growth orientation. So you're saying, look around me, I appreciate what I have, I don't need. I don't have this deficit that I have to fulfill. And the peak experiences, when we have growth orientation and we're now open to new and joyful experiences, we have a love of life. And that would be that self-actualization area. So in many ways, this is from the bottom to the top. This reddish area is deficiency orientation. There's deficiencies here, you need to meet those. The growth orientation is when you're kind of in the middle here, where you're beginning to achieve and enjoy your life. And the peak at the top is when you have a more joyful experience and joyful life. So self-actualizing person is someone, Maslow believed, is able to fulfill their potential. He believed that this desire exists in all people and everybody wants to achieve this, but it's often thwarted by one's environment, like I mentioned. So maybe you don't have those needs met appropriately. You accept the self unconditionally. You're spontaneous and natural, democratic in nature. You like privacy and enjoy privacy. You focus on problems outside of themselves and can handle those problems. Strong ethical and moral sense. Very realistic person. Okay, and maybe you don't have a lot of friends, but the ones that you do have, you value and you're close to. I can't think of anybody that's more self-actualized than William Shatner. So I won't play this for you, but it's in the notes and it's kind of silly. Maybe one of the greatest videos of all time. It's pretty strange, but it's pretty cool. It's William Shatner, a Shatner of the Mount by Fall on Your Sword. I'm not sure if you've seen that before, but it's kind of worth a couple minutes of your time. Let's look at Carl Rogers. That was all Maslow. And now Carl Rogers believed in individuals' personal growth tendencies and people are naturally good. This sounds familiar. The central feature of personality is the self-concept, and our perception of abilities and behaviors and characteristics is about the self-concept in very positive ways. So he looked at 3 areas here. Genuineness, you need this if you're going to grow. You're a genuine person with feelings, and you drop the facades and other things that can hold you back. You have acceptance, where you get rid of the conditions of worth. You must have or offer unconditional positive regard for others. And empathy is also that regard for others, where you share or mirror their feelings and you reflect that meaning. Meaning this, or if you can understand this, you can empathize with another person, not sympathize, not I'm sorry, but you can put yourself in their shoes and almost experience their situation that another person is living through as they describe it to you or as you're talking to them. So empathy is something difficult for some people to be able to achieve. And I think what Carl Rogers would say is you can't be empathetic unless you've kind of come up through that foundation of your environments, giving you some security so that then you can self-actualize, like Maslow's triangle. So assessing the self in humanism. And I like the quote there. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. Makes sense. It's almost like that I can't love others until I love myself kind of quote. And he also said the good life is a process. It's not a state of being. It is a direction and not a destination. So sometimes you hear it's not the destination but the journey. He's even saying it's the direction of that journey. You know, where are you headed? So let's look at a couple things here. In an effort to assess personality, he asked people to describe themselves as they would like to be and as they actually are. So this is a lot like psychoanalytic or self-talk or talk therapy, where it's really dependent upon the person opening up and telling you honestly how they would like to be seen and how they would like to be, and then how they actually are seen, or how they actually are in actual real conditions at this moment and this time. So if the two descriptions are very close to one another, the individual has a very positive self-concept. It matches. Now that doesn't mean that like they're both like elevated. If the person believes that their ideal self isn't quite there yet, but they also believe that that's their real self is sort of there, and that they don't have high goals, but they're reaching that. He says, well, that's a positive self-concept. If they're out of whack and you think you're going to run for president and be elected, but yet there's no possible way that could happen, or if you think you're the most popular person in your class at school and yet that's not the truth, that's the out of whack situation there. We're not really aware of your reality. All our thoughts and feelings about ourselves boil down to the answer to a single question: who am I? And this all refers to the self-concept. And the Venn diagrams at the bottom there gives you an idea of that congruency or incongruency of the self-image and the ideal self. Where there's a lot of overlap, you're congruent. Where there's not enough, that's where self-actualization would be a difficult thing. So let's evaluate the humanistic approach, because I think they've got some good stuff here. There are some things that make some sense, and then there are also definitely some things that you can criticize. First of all, it is consistent with how many people do view themselves. We do want to be good people, I think. There are very few people in this world, I think, who are born evil, and I'm not sure that there are any, but it's tough to tell sometimes. But I think people are generally good. Bad things happen, or they make bad decisions, and then they end up becoming like their self becomes this accumulation of many bad decisions that have compiled up against them. So this has inspired forms of psychotherapy to kind of combine the two ideas, psychotherapy and humanistic approach, coming together, and more of a client-centered approach. And we're going to talk about that in the last chapter, where we look at therapy and treatment for psychological disorder and disease. So we'll get there down the road. It's been criticized for being naive, romantic, and unrealistic. And you can kind of sense that. How would you criticize SpongeBob? Probably the same way. I mean, what's his self-image? Might be pretty good, but is that how others see him? Is that how he really is? I mean, he's just a fry cook. His neighbor is not someone who values him, but yet he doesn't really even see that. He doesn't understand his reality. So SpongeBob's a little naive. Squidward's not a big fan of his, or at least outwardly isn't. It is pretty romantic, this idea that everyone's good and awesome. And I'm sure some of you are listening and going, Duet, you're full of crap. I know a lot of evil people in the world. There are a lot of terrible and mean people, and you don't trust that viewpoint. You think it's unrealistic. Also, it's criticized for emphasizing culture, very specific ideas about mental health, and it's very idealistic. So across culture, humanism may not carry the same weight, or may not work as well. Humanistic psychology had pervasive impact on counseling, education, child rearing, and management. No kidding. It kind of makes sense. That's the objective of someone involved in those pursuits, is to help people reach their self-actualizing purpose and to become better. And if you go into a job as a teacher and you say, well, I think some of my kids can learn, but not all of them. This is a waste of time. It's going to be a very frustrating, difficult job for you. So I think a lot of teachers would be humanists at heart, and maybe they're idealistic in that way, but not as realistic as they maybe need to be sometimes. Now, number two is concepts can be vague and subjective and lack scientific basis, and you know that because how did Rogers do it? He asked them a question. How would you like to be seen, and how are you actually seen? That's very subjective, like the projective test of the Rorschach and the pictures that we showed you, the TAT. So individualism can lead to self-indulgence and selfishness and corruptions, and that's where the cultural approach comes in. So if you look at Asian culture, which is much more about the collective and the whole group of people. For example, there was a situation at Virginia Tech where a young man, had taken a gun and had shot people on campus. The Virginia Tech massacre that happened a few years ago, I think maybe 2007 or so. I'm trying to remember the date or the time for that, but it's a few years ago now. And what happened when that gained national publicity was, I believe the young man was Korean, if I'm not mistaken. He was Asian, of some Asian descent. Well, across the country, what people noticed was many Korean people, or whatever descent he was, were Asian descent. They didn't allow their kids to go to school. They may have stayed home from work that week because they were kind of punishing themselves in a way. They viewed his actions as representing them, and they were somehow at fault as well because they take very seriously this collective idea, the collectivism that we're all here to help each other, and if you are at fault for something, then somehow I am implicated myself. Americans don't seem to have that problem most of the time, and I say American, and that's hard to say with a straight face too, because like America's a melting pot. But the American idealism, or America, that you are an individual, and the American dream is that you can make yourself better by hard work and achieve the American dream. We look at it differently. I think it's more individualistic. So maybe the humanistic approach fits the Western culture. We need to be careful of this emphasis, and it could lead to some real issues and problems, and that's one of the other big critiques of the humanistic approach. So that does it for personality. Thanks a lot for checking this out. If you have any questions, bring them to class, and I'll be glad to help you out with those. We'll see you next time. DFTBA.